Hello everyone, welcome to Business Analytics Programming. This is week 7. We have learned a lot in the Python basic programming, but we still do not have one major functions in Python programming. That is basically we need a function that we can read in from the user input. This one important feature of business analytic programming is to take a piece of information from external resources and then do analytics and return the result based on the input information. Python actually provides the input function for user to enter information such that the downstream code can use the user input information for future analysis. And this has a lot of business use cases. For example, in a banking industry, users usually provide their credit score information, annual income, and some other key information. The system will actually return the credit card approval decision based on those information. And probably you have already applied credit cards online. You enter all your information and you click submit, and then within seconds you get whether you have been approved or not for a particular credit card. So the user information is captured through a particular function, and in Python it is the input function. And another example is the user can enter age. The system will return whether he or she can vote or not. Or in a restaurant business, for the online ordering system, user can enter the choice of toppings of the pizza, and the system will return the total cost of a pizza. So all those algorithm has already coded in the background. The only thing needed for the program to run is some input information from the user. And in this week, we're going to learn how to use the input function to read in the user input such that we can do the downstream analysis and provide a result. So input function is actually very simple. So it is the input in parentheses. Within the parentheses is a string or string variable such that it's going to show to the user some instructions. We call those prompts, and those will be shown as before the text box for the user to input anything. So for example, in this particular case, I have the input parentheses with please enter some info as the prompt, and then there's a message. This is actually a variable. Okay, the variable equal to input function, which means the input function will take care of showing the prompt and take whatever the user input as a string variable and save that variable to the variable you define on the left. So in this particular case, message is going to contain whatever information the user entered into the text box. Once it is saved into a variable message, and this message can be used in the downstream analysis. For example, in this very simple case, we're going to print out what is the user just entered. So that is the simplest case for input functions. So remember here, there are 3 parts. The input function itself, and also the prompt within the input function. It has to be a string or string variable. And you define a variable, and on the left side of the equal sign, this variable will contain all the information the user entered and save that information into a string type. So the message will be a string. And once you run this specific code segment, the cell, first it's going to show you the prompt that what you entered within the input function, and as well as a text box. The text box actually is going to take whatever the user input. When the user input the information and press enter, that is actually what happened. Once the user input something and press enter, the message is going to take whatever the user input. In this particular case, the user input is hello world. Then it saves the information as a string into this variable message. Now we can use the message for the downstream analysis. In this particular case, we just want to print out what the user just entered. You can see that it's actually print out what the user just input right here. So in the input function, actually a clear prompt is very important. So basically it will tell the user what kind of information the program or the code is expecting. So you can write prompts in a particular variable. Like for example, in this particular case, I create a variable called prompt, which is a string. And in this particular one, actually, I create my prompt information in 2 lines. To separate information in 2 lines, you can use the /n to start a new line. So in this particular case, the prompt is actually showed up in 2 lines. The text box is followed on the last line. So remember to write a clear prompt such that the user knows what kind of information to take. You have already used a lot of these online applications, like credit card application and whatever, like a social media. When you apply a count, it has all the information that is asking you with very clear prompt. Otherwise, the user is confused and they may not enter the information that you want. And also, as I mentioned, the variable that actually saves whatever the user input is going to be saved as a string, which means is even if the user enter a numerical number, it is saved as string. It's no longer numeric. So, but sometimes we need to recover from the string message into a numerical value. So we will need 2 functions. If what the user entered is an integer, like no decimal point, you can use the int function to convert string into an integer, such that those integer can be used for the downstream analysis. And if the user enters something is a float number which actually contains a decimal point, you can use the float function to convert a string into a number. So in this particular case, we have 2 examples. The first example is actually the age is the input, and the user entered 80. Initially, when the user input, the age is a string. Basically, it saves 80 as a character. But we want to do some comparison between the 80 character with 18, which is numerical value. So what we can do is use the int function to convert age into the string of age into the integer of age. So by doing that, the age actually become 80, which is a numerical integer. And then we actually print out whether the user input is larger than 18 or not. In this particular case, it is true, which means age 80 is larger than 18. In the second example here, the user input is something with a decimal point. It's 2.4, and it's a temperature. And in this particular case, we want to add the temperature of 2.4 with 3.5. So we need to convert this string to decimal point 4 as a string to a numerical value. We use a float function. It's a floating number. We call it float. Okay, so those are the 2 examples. We actually use int and float to convert string into numerical value. Okay, actually, when you are actually using the Jupyter Python notebook, if you actually create a input box for the user to input some information, but the user didn't input anything, and you go to the next cell, and then basically you didn't provide the needed information to the text box by the input function, the entire notebook may not run correctly. I noticed that when I actually intentionally to skip one of the input box and then run to the next cell, it actually doesn't run correctly. Once you observe that your program is not running correctly, one way to solve the problem is to click on the kernel menu and this restart and the clean output button to clean any pending input requirement. And basically, it's going to clean everything from this style. The only thing left is the Python code. All the variables and the content within the variables, etc., anything that you have run, saved in the memory, is going to be cleared out. But your Python source code in the cell is going to will not be removed. And sometimes if your notebook is not running as expectedly, sometimes due to the input function, sometimes due to other scenarios, you can always click the kernel and restart and clean output to clean the potential pending tasks with some errors. And also remember, do not try to use function names such as print or Python keywords such as del as your own variable name. Otherwise, it will introduce an unexpected result too. So, that's another concerns. Do not use or do not assign anything to a particular Python functions. And also Python keywords. Otherwise, it's going to introduce unexpected result. Okay, once we finish the input function, now let's go to the next topic, which is while loop. We actually have already learned the for loop a couple weeks ago, and the for loop it will loop through the body of the for loop for predefined times. And sometimes the exact number of times to run the loop is unknown, such that it will depend on the user's input. And in those cases, the for loop is not going to work, but the while loop is designed to take care of such situation. The while loop runs as long as a certain condition is true. The while loop and the for loop, they have very similar structures. So in the while loop, there are three parts. Okay, the first part is the while definition is actually defined. Okay, that is a while loop, and then the semicolon at the end of the first line is indicating the start of the loop, and in the middle is actually a particular condition, the logic condition. And when this logic condition is true, then it's actually go into the while loop's body, which is indicated by the indentation. You can have one line, two lines, or multiple lines within the while loop's body, but they have ought to be kind of like indented with the same amount. Okay, in this particular example, the while loop is actually trying to evaluate this condition, whether it is true or not. Okay, to begin from the very beginning, the message is actually initially it is a empty string, nothing within the message. Okay, within the while loop, it's going to first evaluate whether this condition is true or not. If it is true, then the body of the while loop is going to be executed. If the condition is false, and then the while loop is going to skip anything and go to within the body and go to the next code segment. In this particular case, the condition is whether message is not equal to quit. And because our message is empty, it's nothing there, so it is not quit. So this is true. When it is true, it go into the while loop body. Then within the while loop body, the first one is actually input something to get something from the user. And then we're going to save whatever the user input into this function to the text box and then save that into the message and then print the message out. In this particular one, the first time I put in hello, and then the message is hello, and then it's going to print hello out. And then now, once we finish the body, the while loop go back to the beginning of the while loop. So it's going to evaluate whether the message is not equal to quit. And because I entered the hello, so the message hello is not equal to quit. So this condition is true. So the while loop body is going to be run one more time. In this particular case, in the second piece, I actually entered QUIT. Basically, it's going to print out the QUIT and then do this evaluation again. And because QUIT is indeed equal to QUIT, so this condition becomes false. So the while loop is no longer going to go through any of the loop body, but go direct to the next segment. So this is how the while loop actually works. It is very similar to the for loop, but the condition the condition is actually exempt within the while loop, and this condition can be determined or changed within the body of the while loop. When we're using while loop or for loop, there are actually a few different very useful statements. The first one is break. And in both for and while loop, if the program runs and reach break, the program will actually stop running any of the remaining loop and exit the entire loop and go to the next code segment. In this particular one, because I'm using while true, so it is always true in the condition definition. So if there's no break, then it's become an infinite loop. It's going to loop all the time. But because I have a break sentence here, so whenever the city that I entered or the user entered is QUIT, then it's going to break this loop, which means it's going to go to the next code segment without running anything within the for loop again. Another similar function is continue. The continue can be used for both for and while loop. So if the program runs and reach the continue, then the program will skip the current loop and go to the beginning of the loop to run it again. So the continue is not going to actually exit the entire loop. What it's going to do is basically skip anything anything that after the continue sentence, anything that within the for loop is going to skip for the current round and go to the beginning of the for or while loop again. So the continue will give us the loop actual signal to go back to the beginning of the loop and run it again. Go back. Whenever it reaches the continue, it's going to go back to the loop, the beginning of the loop, and go again. In this particular case, the number is actually the number is 0, and because 0 less than 10, so it's going to run. If the 0 is equal to 0 plus 1, then the number becomes 1, and in this particular case, whenever the number that's mode on number and 2, which is the remainder after this number divided by 2, if it's equal to 0, it's going to continue. So all even numbers, this is basically go back to the beginning of the loop. For even numbers, because this condition is not true, so it's not going to exit the continue part. So it's going to print a number out and then go to the beginning of the loop. So any even number is not going to print out, but all the odd number is going to be printed out. And whenever it's reached 10, and then because 10 is not less than 10, so it's going to actually finish the while loop and go to the next code segment. So break and continue are two very useful statements in the for and while loop. Break is going to, whenever the program reach break, it's going to exit from the loop totally and go to the next code segment. If the code reach continue, basically it's going to skip the rest of the current loop and go back to the beginning of the loop to start it again. So that's the difference between break and continue. And also in while or for loop, it is very useful to define a flag. Okay, in this particular example, I define the flag variable called active. Initially, the active is true, and this active variable, the flag, can be changed to false during the body of the while loop. And whenever it is false, and then the while loop is going to be finished. So using a flag is particularly useful when the condition is very complex. In this particular case, it's not that complex. It's just a relatively simple one, but cases are, it could be complicated. And also prevent infinite loops. Okay, so in for loop or while loop, there are cases, especially in while loop, that is the condition is always true, and the loop body is not going to make the condition to be false, or there's no break in the body of the while loop, or even if you have the break but it's never going to reach the break, then it will run forever. Okay, that is dangerous. Your computer run a loop forever. In the notebook version, the Jupyter notebook, if you have an infinite loop, the notebook will freeze. Okay, because the computer is going to allocate all the resources to that particular segment because it's running all the time. So the notebook will freeze. You have to close the browser and the command window and restart the Jupyter notebook again. Once it starts, remember to delete the cell containing the infinite loop. If you have the output from the infinite loop, then you're going to see a very long cell to contain the output. It takes a lot of memory, and remember to delete this particular cell. So, but try to prevent any infinite loop. Look at your code and try to prevent any infinite loop. But once you have infinite loop, it's not going to stop, and then your notebook will freeze. So remember to close the browser window and browser and window to restart your Jupyter notebook again. So that's one of the precaution. You may have some infinite loop while you do those Python code. The while loop actually can be used with list and dictionary. In this particular example, two examples, I'm going to show you how to use a while loop with a list. Okay, when you actually use a list name as the condition in the while loop, the while loop is going to run. The while loop is going to run when the my list is actually has some element in it. Whenever the my list become empty, the while loop is going to stop. Okay, so make sure within the body of your while loop you have some mechanism to make this my list to be empty. Okay, in this particular example, my list initially there are 4 names, and initially because there are 4 names, so it is basically the while loop consider it's true and it's going to continue. And then within the body of the while loop, that's basically I'm actually using the pop method to the list. Basically every time it is run, it's going to pop up one of the element. So when it run once, the my list then become 3 elements. When it run another time, the Tom is going to be popped out, then it's become 2 elements. So when it runs 4 times, then my list become empty. When it's empty, it's actually a signal to the while loop to stop and go to the next code segment. So this is we can put actually a list name, a variable which is a list into the while loop as a condition. And another example is actually using the while loop to fill in the dictionary. In this particular one, the condition we're using a flag as the condition, and then initially we define a dictionary. Notice here is braces, which is define responses as a dictionary. If it's true, initially, yes, it is true. And then there are a few different lines. Basically, it's asking the user to input what is your name and what you're going to vote, D or R. And then this sentence is basically to create a dictionary with the key as the name the user just inputted, and the value is the decision that the user just entered. And also there's a variable called repeat. It's basically asking whether you want to continue or not, the user to continue or not. If the user entered Y, which means they want to continue, and then we're going to go to the next round in the while loop. If the user enter anything other than Y, which including N or any other input, it's going to change the flag to false. Basically, it's going to actually exit the while loop. And then this is one example that you can fill in the dictionary element using a while loop. This while loop, the flag is actually changed when the user input Y, when the prompt is asking whether the user would you like to continue. So this is one particular example to use the while loop to fill in a dictionary. Okay, so in this week we have finalized we learned how to use the input to get the user's feedback, as well as use while loop to do some task. Now it is time for the first project. The first project is relatively simple, but it actually give you the idea of how to design a credit approval system. But before we go to the detail of the project, first, please read through Chapter 7 of the textbook and repeat all the Python code in your local computer's Jupyter notebook. And if you want to skip the infinite loop one, you can, and because otherwise you have to close your browser and the window and restart it again. So you can skip the infinite loop piece. But if you want to see what will happen if you have an infinite loop, you can do it. That's not going to hurt too much. Please save your notebook into a HTML file and submit through the eCollege. So this is the first part of the project. It's a 3-point. It's very similar to our typical homework assignment. For the second part of the project is basically create a credit card approval system. After we learn the basic Python, we'll create some applications to see how Python is being used in practice. In this particular one, we will create a credit score checker to see if a bank should approve a customer credit card application or not. Please note, for this part, you're going to use the knowledge you learned in the past few weeks as well as this week. So it's basically need all the information that you have learned so far. So the business scenario is the IT department in a bank is asked to create an application, use Python to achieve the following functions. When the application runs, it will show the following information as prompt. What is your FICO score? And then the user can enter his or her FICO scores. And and the corresponding message will be returned as defined below once the user enter their FICO score and press enter. So if the score is less than 400, the application shows the following message on the screen. We're sorry, we cannot approve your application at this moment. If the FICO score range from 400 to 699, the application is going to show the following message. Thank you, your application is under review. And if the FICO score is greater than or equal to 700, the application will show the following message on the screen. Congratulations, your application has been approved. So please write your Python code in one cell of your local computer's Jupyter notebook. After you finalize your code, run the code and wait the user input of 678. Then save your code and result into a HTML file and submit it to the e-college. So the due date of the projects will be Sunday next week. So remember to submit two HTML files for the first part and second part. Thank you. See you next time.